Good morning, Razorback Nation. We are here on this nice, lovely, rainy morning at our partners, Parker Sports Grill, for the Hogs on the Hill pregame tailgate show. As we got Memphis, Arkansas coming up in just T-minus 54 minutes. So, we are brought to you by our friends at Parker Sports Grill here in Fayetteville, the ultimate spot for Razorback fans, whether it's game day or just a night out. Parker's has you covered with mouth-watering burgers, wings, and ice-cold drinks, served up in a true sports atmosphere with TVs on every wall. You won't miss a single play while you're cheering on the Hogs. So grab your crew, head down to Parker Sports Grill, make it your go-to spot for food, fun, and Razorback sports. That's Parker Sports Grill, where Fayetteville comes to eat, drink, and call the Hogs. And our lovely sponsors over at Razor Pigs, looking good, never felt so fun. Razor Pigs is the Arkansas-born brand bringing some serious style to the golf course, tailgate, and everywhere in between. From high-quality polos to head-turning hats, they've got what you need to rep the natural state with pride. Find it right here at home and now run by a Razorback-loving family. Razor Pigs is where comfort meets cool. So go hog wild and shop Razor Pigs today at razorpigs.us. As you can see, I've got one of the lovely hats that they have. Hobbs usually is repping this one when he's with us, but, I'll take that place today. And so it's game day morning. We've got Arkansas-Memphis coming up here in a little bit. We talked a little bit about it with Memphis Spence on Thursday, but just, 2 days later on game day, how are you feeling going into the game today in Memphis?
Yeah, man, I'm pretty excited about it. At the same time, I'm a little bit hesitant about this defense. I've watched a lot of tape from, especially like the 4th and 5 podcast. They do a very good job at like breaking down stuff. But at the same time, they're just out of the place a lot. And I think it's more than a talent issue at this point. I think a lot of it has to do with them not being like together for a very long time. I mean, Julian Neal, he's probably the best defensive back we have, if not, in the top 2 or 3. He's only been here since, for the summer. He came after the spring. So you got a lot of growing with this team. And maybe after a while, they'll be more cohesive and whatnot. But right now, I'm still a little bit worried. Now, Arkansas is going to be able to outscore Memphis. I still think Arkansas gets the win. It's just I want to see some growth from this defense, and I want to see a little bit more tenacity, I guess.
Yeah, I feel that 100%. I mean, and you also talk about defense and some of these players. Something Pittman mentioned in his press conference earlier this week was that he wasn't sure if Kunai Walker was going to be able to play today due to his injury last week at Ole Miss. As if you recall, he was carted off the field. If he doesn't suit up and play today, Pittman mentioned that's going to fall to a combination of Jaheim Singletary and Keyshawn Davila. So those two guys are going to see a lot more snaps today if, Kunai isn't able to go. And one thing he mentioned specifically, Jaheim Singletary, is, he had a lot of penalties in last week as far as pass interference goes. And they even mentioned with some of these DBs, practice this week, they were putting gloves on these guys to kind of help break the habit that they have of grabbing and tugging on these wide receivers' jerseys and pads and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, like especially like the Jaheim Singletary part. I don't mean cheating as in like cheating, but whenever he tries to take shortcuts whenever he is in coverage like that, and that's what happens. Is penalties happen. You start grabbing and you start trying to keep up with guys when you're not playing, sound technique. And he's too good to be doing that at the same time. So hopefully this is a coming out game for him. I mean, it's about time. He's been in college for a while. He was a 5-star prospect. He's got the stuff. He doesn't just get those 5 stars for nothing. So he's got the stuff to do it. He just needs to be able to put it all together. Hopefully against this team who doesn't have a great passing game, to be honest with you. Hopefully that's a little bit of a good thing for him. But I can tell you they're going to probably pick on him. They're going to pick on him or Davila or whoever's out there across from Julian Neal. Just because Julian Neal is kind of locked down, he has been for the last few games. They're gonna go to the other side, but that's also gonna make Memphis a little bit one-sided.
Yeah, I agree, and that's the thing that we saw last week that killed Arkansas was penalties. We'd get a stop or it looked like you were in a good position, and then see them bailed out with a penalty, and I mean that kind of happened. On the vice versa of that too, Talon had a couple of throws that were bad, looked like they might be interception, but got called back because of a penalty, which broke Arkansas's way. But, at the end of the day, if you want to have success, you want to have a clean game. And that's what we need to see from this defense today. I know there's probably a lot of emphasis and practice put on that this week after, just that abysmal performance last week. I mean, yes, your defense did enough to get a stop or two to put you in position to win the ball game, because that's what it was last week. Arkansas was in prime position to win that ball game, and then you had the unfortunate turnover, the only one of the game, and unfortunately, it went against Arkansas, rolled Ole Miss's way, and ultimately kind of sealed the deal for Arkansas. And I mentioned that earlier in the season when we were previewing, or earlier in fall camp when we were previewing this team and going through things, is that I really felt like this team would have the look of a traditional, Bobby Petrino team from years past, where you have such a high-powered, high-potent offense that you would be able to score a lot. But on the flip side of that, your defenses wasn't great. Your defenses would get a stop or two, but, you really relied on outscoring guys. And that's really feeling what this season is going to come down to is Talon Green and this offense, and they're just going to have to go out there and outscore people.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what's going to happen. But the thing is, I think this defense has the ability to be decent. Like I said, a lot of it's being out of position, a lot of it's coaching stuff, which I've been a big fan of T. Will this entire time. This is probably, so far, it's been kind of not the greatest coaching job he's had. But he's also, like I said, he's kind of had his hands behind his back with some of these guys. He had to rebuild his entire secondary. Most of these guys are new. Larry Worth is kind of the only one that's come back, really.
Who was Xavier Story?
Well, he's not secondary. Yeah, but at the same time, you just got to get it done. You have too much talent on this team to be doing that. So, yeah, I don't know, man. I think they have a good chance of being a decent defense. And the thing is, if Arkansas's defense is mediocre, they're going to win a lot of football games this year.
Yeah, and I mean, that's the thing is, this could be the year in the SEC of no defenses because, I mean, we saw last week Ole Miss, but, you've seen, I don't know whether to chalk it up to both Georgia and Tennessee are just that good, or, you watched that game last week going to overtime, those teams are just scoring back and forth as well. So is this the year we kind of see a weaker SEC in terms of defenses across all the teams, and you have a lot of offenses that are going to score points? But to your point, there's a lot of talent on this defense, and if they can continue to week by week get better, get that continuity, and be in position better and learn how to work off of each other, that could help Arkansas in the long run. We've seen historically under Travis Williams, your defenses get better as you go in the season, and at this point, that's what you got to hope for going forward.
Yeah, exactly. I still think, obviously, the key to this team is that the offense stays exactly the way they are. They need to go out there and, do what they do. I was actually really surprised that they put it on Ole Miss like that. They didn't have a whole lot of bad plays. They had a couple of mistakes from Talon Green that luckily didn't end up, costing Arkansas very much. But at the same time, you need to have a defense that's a little bit tougher, that where whenever you do make that one mistake, whenever, Jaylen Brown fumbled that ball, that it doesn't cost you like that. So at the same time, you need to have Starsick actually make some field goals. I mean, he came out and kicked that 50-something yarder at the beginning of the season. We all thought, hey, it's another Cam Little coming on, but then he's missed these two in a row. It's like he's got to get, that going. At the same time, it was also on the road against Ole Miss, so I get it being a freshman, but you got to have that part of your game going as well, and then just make one or two more stops. And the thing is, Arkansas's defense did make a stop at the end of the game. They did give Arkansas's offense a chance to go and win it, and they just didn't.
Yeah, and like I said, that's the way the ball broke. But yeah, to your point, that was something I want to talk about too. Is you've got to have. Yes, I know you're a freshman, high expectations, but a guy like Scott Starsick has got to step up. That's Hobbs' guy. Hobbs joined us in the chat here, but that's Hobbs' guy that he wanted to talk about all offseason. And so now he needs to bounce back this week and, when he's called upon, be able to execute. Yeah, I'll give you a break. You're a true freshman, night game in the SEC. that's a tough ask. So, all right, you got those jitters out of the way last week, bounce back this week. If we need you to kick some field goals this week, come out there and execute. But hopefully that's not the case where we're having to come out there and make, 40, 50-yard field goals. And I also would like to see a little bit more aggressiveness when you talk about the offense. 4th and 2 last week on the opening drive. And I don't know if it was a Pittman overruling Petrino thing or for, what the kind of game plan was or analytics. But if it's me, I'm going for that every time, especially, hindsight's 2020. But the entire game, that Ole Miss defense had no answer for Taylon Green. And so, drop some type of option play. Even if Taylon just falls forward, he's getting 2 yards with just, he's 6'6". You're going to fall forward and get 2 yards.
Yeah, and I mean, at the same time, if they would have went for it and it didn't work, there'd be just as much people going off on Sam Pittman. So I don't want to really put it on, one decision or another. But here's what I had a problem with. You had the aggressiveness to take the ball first, and then you don't have the aggressiveness to go for it on 4th and 2. I mean, just stay consistent. If you want to take the ball first, go down there and score. Don't let up whenever things get hard. Go down there and keep your nose to the grindstone and keep, being aggressive. And they just didn't. I don't like that difference in philosophy, I guess, at the beginning of the game. Other than that, they were pretty aggressive the rest of the night, though.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's one of those calls where you're like, all right, yes, we won the toss. We'll take the ball first. If that's the case, you want to go out and make a statement on your opening drive and score. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. And then you give the ball a miss, and then, of course, they go down and score. And then you're automatically playing from behind. But at the end of the day, I think this team can do a lot of good things. They'll probably win a game or two. They shouldn't. But, Hobbs is in here saying, and I think it's the case, is Pittman mentioned this in his presser. He took a few plays to the SEC, but, how about our officiating making correct calls during the game? That was something we saw. At least one touchdown that Ole Miss had. I know it was off a pick play that wasn't called. Mm-hmm. And so, you can't blame it. We're not saying that, there's losses on the officials, but it didn't help at all. And, it seemed that they were very flag happy. So hopefully, this week is a little bit better and more consistent, and you don't have, things that should be called not being called, but then you throw a flag on a weak play that could go either way, 50-50, and then it hurts you.
Here's my problem with that is that there was at least one drive with Ole Miss where they went down and they were in the red zone, and they took 5 or 6 plays to actually score, and I'm pretty sure they scored once or twice before the touchdown actually counted. And it's because they were calling those penalties back and forth. So even if they did call that penalty on that pick play, I didn't trust Arkansas's defense not to let it up. At least, they'll have a field goal no matter what. But at the same time, I didn't trust them to, keep it from scoring that touchdown. And at the same time, it also, if you call that penalty, it's going to take more time off the clock, and that's going to keep your offense off the field. So it's kind of like, at the end of the game where you want the other team to score. That way you have the ball back for some more time so you can go down and score. That's how I looked at it. So I'm not it's obviously a pick play. It was a pick play no matter what. It should have been called. At the same time, I really didn't care that much about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, different outlooks there, but and Hobbs like to throw in here, he said the play the defender got to Blake before the ball got there, and that was no call as far as the PI, and then we end up missing the field goal on that same drive. That I think that play was in the end zone. You had Omega Blake there, and that may be one of those calls that are more 50-50. It's like, if you're those referees, especially the back judge there, looking, it's like you got to make that call real fast.
Yeah, man. We can blame, the refs a little bit because they were nitpicky at times, and then they were also completely opposite. I'm like that with them, like I was with Sam Pittman. Just be consistent. If you're going to call that stuff, call it throughout the game. If you're not, don't call it through the game.
Right.
Because that's where it starts to change. If you have an even playing field, that's where you can say, hey, we beat you or you beat us. But now you have these refs making these calls, and you have people coming out and saying that. At the same time, you got to control what you got to control, what you can control, and you can't control the refs.
Right. And so let's jump into some analytics of this matchup. Our friends over at that SEC podcast hosted by SEC Mike put together a nice little sheet here that kind of breaks down different parts of the teams and the offense. And, that starts with the scoring offense. We know that Arkansas can score number 10 scoring offense versus Memphis's number 41 scoring offense. On the vice versa, that scoring defense, Memphis is up there at number 20, which gives them the edge, whereas Arkansas is at 65. Looking at just in general the offenses and defenses, we clearly know Arkansas, Taylor have the edge. Memphis Spence really like to keep going back to, I don't know what we're going to do with Taylor Green. And so we know that's an obvious there. But defensively, that's what I mentioned was, to me, a big matchup to watch in this game is going to be Memphis's front four on defense against Arkansas's O-line. We saw them perform well last week, surprisingly well, compared to the previous 2 seasons under Pittman. But, what is this front four and this exotic look that, Memphis is going to draw up for this defense going to affect this offensive line this week?
Yep. I think they'll have them prepared. They had them prepared for the last few weeks. And I don't know, man. This, like you said, I think this may be the best offensive line they've had, which is insane to say about a career offensive line coach being your head coach. But I kind of do believe in them a little bit. Now, this will be a big test. They'll have a lot of stuff that they'll have to look at. But the thing is, they also have their own defense that they go against every single offseason that has those exotic blitzes, that has that type of stuff coming at them. So it's not like they haven't seen anything like that. It's also going to be a lower level of talent that they're going to go against. So I still believe in this offensive line. I think they'll be able to cover it pretty good. Yeah,
and when you talk about front four, that's something I want to see more from Arkansas's front four, that we've been asking for more week in and week out, as the seasons progress. Pittman mentioned in his presser this week about Cam Ball with his playing a lot of snaps, that they're trying to reduce what snaps he's on in terms of not defense. He mentioned part of it last week was with the up-tempo offense Ole Miss was running, that sometimes they couldn't sub him off. And so he was having to be on the field a little bit longer than, what they ideally would have asked for. But we're going to need more out of this front four as the season goes on. And I hope, last week, I believe was David Oki's first week back. He missed the first 2 games of the season. So hopefully, he got that first game under his belt. You're back this week. There were some questions on some availability for some other guys. And, Pittman said, we'll see how it goes. But I think we should expect, for the most part, everybody back on that D-line, which hopefully with that depth will allow them to get a little bit more pressure. That was one thing I noticed last week during the Ole Miss game is you had – our line was getting some pressure and almost had Chambliss in the backfield, but you got to finish those tackles and wrap up instead of trying to, just reach or grab at a guy.
Yeah, that was a big problem. They had some big problems tackling, and I maybe they went and did some tackling this week and probably tried to shore that up a little bit. But as far as the front four goes, to me, they're doing kind of what they are supposed to, specifically in the running game. Passing, you got to get more pressure, right? Especially in the middle. If you can push that pocket up, that's going to create a lot of panic in these quarterbacks. And that comes from, Ian Jaffard and Cam Ball. I think the ends are doing a decent amount of work. There was a couple times where Quincy Rose was like right there at Chambliss, and there was at least one time he was in the middle of tackling Chambliss when he threw like a 20-yard pass. And honestly, Arkansas just does a very good job at making these backup quarterbacks look like Heisman candidates. So that's just what happens. But at the same time, they were getting there. It just wasn't as quick as it needs to be. And I think if you had that pressure in the middle of the pocket, you're going to have some better luck right there. But in the running game, I think they're doing exactly what they need to do. Arkansas's running defense is one of the better ones in the country. Right there, what do they have it? Defensive efficiency 62. I don't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I know that's the numbers, but at the same time, they played harder competition than a lot of people have. And they held what's his name, Chambliss and Lacey Kewan Lacey to under 106, I think 106 yards. Kewan Lacey has been killing it this year, so that was a big thing. It's just they couldn't stop the pass.
Yeah, I agree. We saw several plays. I know one play specifically, you had Quincy Rhodes that, he really made an effort and ran Chambliss out of bounds. He almost had him, taken down in the backfield for a loss, but, a big effort play there. But, you look at the defensive efficiency, both these teams are right there, as far as statistically, right there about the same. Arkansas coming in at number 77 and Memphis coming in at number 80. So, they're predicting these defenses to perform about the same. We talked about the offense. We know that. On the thing for Arkansas, I love what Taylor Green's doing, but I want to see Mike Washington and Braden Russell kind of be your guys that are your leading rushers. Now, if it means Taylor Green is the leading rusher for you to keep being successful, by all means, that's the case. But we've seen those flashes out of Mike Washington and the bruising ability that Braylon Russell has. So, kind of let's put more emphasis on that, especially because, as the full season goes on, yes, Taylor's a great rusher. He gets out of the pocket, but you want to kind of minimize as many hits as he has to take. And, I know a lot of the time he gets outside the pocket, he's going to beat guys just based on pure speed. He gets in that second, third level, good luck catching him. But, when you talk about rush offense efficiency, Arkansas comes in at number 2, but Memphis also comes in at number 6 because they also have a really good rusher as well. Memphis Spence hit on that. Is if you're wanting to stop one guy, look at Memphis's running back.
Yeah, Sutton Smith. I mean, 247 yards. He averages six a carry. I mean, that's pretty dang good. And then you have their quarterback, Brandon Lewis, who also has nearly 6 a carry. So they've got a good running game. They really do. But at the same time, I think Arkansas's rush defense is pretty good. I know it says 62 right there. At the same time, I think they're getting better and they're playing gap integrity, and I think they'll be able to pull them down a little bit in this game. But at the same time, you've got to worry about Lewis's legs because he's already got 608 yards. He doesn't really have a whole lot of passing touchdowns. He's only got 2. So I don't know if this receiving core is going to be extremely hard for Arkansas secondary to cover. At the same time, they've got to be in the right place too. So, but as far as the point you made about Taylor Green not being the person that has the most rushing yards, they do a lot of zone read, a lot of read option plays that they just take what the defense gives them. So if that defensive end or whoever it is that he's reading crashes down, he's going to pull it every time. And at the same time, it's just up to them. But that's also the big chunk plays. So whenever that the defensive end crashes down, that's when he can take it for like 15, 20 yards. So those are the plays you want, but you also want him to stay, healthy. And he's done a good job of that. There are some times where he tries to get that extra yard and he tries to be like Josh Allen a little bit, put his head down. And the thing is, he's got a little weight behind him to do it. But at the same time, he's really long. You don't want him to get those legs caught up with anybody or anything like that. So, but he's done a pretty good, compared to last year, he's done a good job of keeping himself healthy.
I agree, and that's the thing. Like, if it leads to Arkansas success on those zone replays where you have that edge crashing them really hard. Another thing that I think Taylor does really well that may be a little bit underrated, but as the season goes, it might be more aware, is just how long he waits as far as when he pulls the ball. He puts that ball in the gut of the running back, and absolute last minute is really good about pulling it and taking it. So, and then that's part of why you have a lot of these DNs crashing hard, because they really do think this running back's about to get the ball, and then at the last second, Taylor yanks that ball out of the arms of the running back and takes, like you said, for those chunk plays.
Yeah, at the same time, he's like, I see what you're saying. He's also making that read quicker too. So he waits to the very last moment to do it. And if you recall that Texas A&M game where that defensive end hit that mesh point and caused that fumble right there at Arkansas's end zone, and they went and scored afterwards. That's where they've had trouble, but he's making that a little bit quicker, but he's also waiting up to the very last moment to get the best out of it. So he has made some strides there. At the same time, you got to think about Bobby Petrino and how he's made these quarterbacks do a very good job at hiding the ball whenever it's like a play action pass. Before the read option became really popular in college, and I think he's kind of bringing that to the running game in the read option. Trying to create as much confusion with that defensive line as possible. So I think that's completely and totally a product of Bobby Petrino being the quarterback coach.
100%. And I mean, the number of times during the first 3 games of the season where, you've seen even Talon has the cameraman fake that they've got it focused on the running back. And then, they have to flash back real quick to see Talon streaking down the field because he got out on the edge because they really thought that the, running back had the ball. And to your point, Bobby Petrino offense, that's what you're going to get. And, and that goes to the next point here. Arkansas ranks number 3 in explosive plays in the offense. I mean, that's what you expect with a Bobby Petrino offense. And, I think so far it's safe to say you can see the strides that Talon's made in year 2. I mean, we talked about that all offseason statistically. Guys under Bobby Petrino's offense in year 2 make a leap in, offensive production and understanding the offense. So, you see here, I think Talon's making his reads better. We talked about it before, how he's spreading out the ball, across more receivers instead of kind of last year it was Andrew Armstrong and then run, where he's actually going through his reads this year through the first 3 games. He's averaging spreading the ball around between 7, 8, 9 guys each game. And, there's a clear number 1 target, Omega Blake, that's obvious. But he's not so locked on it where, if he's not open, Talon's not looking anywhere else. You're looking at other guys like Raylan Sharp, C.J. Brown, Jalen Brown. Those other guys are getting opportunities as well.
Yeah, and the only thing that I would say I'd like to see a lot more of Rohan Jones too, because that dude is fast. Like they were talking about how fast he was in fall camp and in the spring and whatnot. But seeing it on camera and seeing him get that first catch for a touchdown, he's got some speed. Now, I like what they're doing with Jaden Platt, though. I like those play action passes at the beginning of the game for those big chunk yards. That's always open. The first play, there is someone always open. Like that's how Bobby Petrino is an offensive genius. Like every single first play, there's someone wide open like that. But having those tight ends do a streak or shallow cross like that, that's kind of like the bread and butter of his offense. And I'd like to see a little bit more of that coming from Rohan Jones, because I think he could take that and he could probably beat that linebacker to the corner and then make even more yards than Jaden Platt does.
Agreed. And that's the one thing that I think if you get that increased usage in this offense of your tight ends, Jaden Platt, Rohan Jones, even you've seen Andreas Puska, down in the end zone, be a big body target for Talon. You increase getting those guys involved, this offense just gets better. So, we've seen historically when Petrino was here before in his first stint at Arkansas as head coach, using those tight ends quite frequently. And I think as these guys mesh and are, the season goes on, you'll see a lot more usage. That's what you've seen from game 1 to last week against Ole Miss. We were talking after game 1, it's like, where are the tight ends? Right. You saw increased usage against Arkansas State. And then, last week, Jaden Platt, Rohan Jones getting more usage. And that's the thing. And I've noticed a lot with this offense, you have a lot more, I don't know statistically, but it feels like we're running a lot more crossing route type plays where you have guys coming across the middle, and that maybe just because of personnel. We talked about it before. There hadn't been a ton of necessarily deep shots from Talon this season. You've seen big chunk yardage plays, but it's not because it's been a chunk, down the field throw. It's been you get the guy the ball in space, and then he's able to move and, pick up that additional yardage. And, if it's one of those things where you have those crossing routes and you're making these type of plays, you don't have to throw it down the field. But we know how well, Talon has a good deep ball. So, if it comes down to it, and the season goes, that's something that I would like to see more. But, if it's not broke, don't fix it. So, if that's not necessarily things that are going to work in this offense, keep running what's working.
Yeah, and I mean, that brings you back to last season whenever Arkansas played UAB. Trent Dilfer was talking about how Arkansas's offense was made to beat zone, and they didn't play zone, they played man. And I was critical of that because I was like, well, they haven't played anybody that plays man yet before they played UAB. And then they get into that UAB game and they don't look very good. So I understand that, and I think that's the progress that Talon Green's made to encompass more of that playbook. So now they can do those crossing routes that beat man, and they can do stuff that beats man, as well as have those zone beaters in their arsenal. So yeah, this is the progression of Talon Green, like right before our eyes.
Agreed. 100%. I think his progression and what he's done each week, he's putting together these masterclass performances, and, being low key, his name thrown in around that Heisman, we talked about.
And it's not even low key anymore. I mean, I saw an ESPN article about it. Like, he has the chance to get into this race. I'm like, they don't usually do that. Like, we talk about the Heisman race at the beginning, in the summer and the beginning of the season, and most of the time it's just hopeful. But
right,
watching how he's played and seeing other people notice it, it's becoming a little bit more than hopeful.
I agree. And I mean, even Talon was a guest appearance on, a Heisman podcast where, they had him come on. So, things are coming together. And if he can keep up these performances, and, that's something that Memphis Spence hit on earlier in the week is Talon, we've seen these performances up till now thus far. Can he continue on in SEC play? Can he have these types of games in the SEC against, that higher level of defensive competition? And so, that's yet to be seen. We saw him do it against Ole Miss, but is it, one of those things where, does Ole Miss, it was both these teams' offense is just that good, or did they just not have a defense similarly to Arkansas? How is Talon going to, perform when you go up against an LSU, a Texas, these teams that are towards the upper level of the SEC this season, compared to, an Alabama, A&M, Arkansas State type of game?
Yeah, and the thing is, I mean, if you look at Lamar Jackson's numbers from whenever he won the Heisman, and if you look at how, and I know they haven't played anybody, right? I know that. So this is just me doing a little bit of math, probably before I should. But at the same time, Arkansas's passing offense is going to be close to like 3,800 yards if they keep on this pace. And if Talon Green keeps on this pace for rushing yards, he's going to have probably 1,200 yards. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but it could. And if you look at Lamar Jackson, he threw for the year he won the Heisman, he threw for 3,300 yards, almost 3,400 yards, and for 30 touchdowns and 1,500 yards passing. So they're pretty close in those numbers. And if he can keep on that pace, man, it's going to be hard not to at least put him in that conversation, even if Arkansas doesn't do well this season.
Right. Win it or not, I think as of right now, like you said, if he keeps that pace, he at least deserves to be in that conversation. And I think he's putting a, really good tape out there for himself for, the NFL. That's something we haven't talked about. We've seen the transition through the NFL of teams going to more mobile type quarterbacks across the league. And so, if he can set himself up with this film and, show his progression, he might be a, mid to late round type of guy where a team takes an opportunity. You see the upside with just the physicals, the talent is there. And, if he keeps progressing and making his reads, kind of that football IQ piece of learning the offenses, he could surprise some people and be one of those guys that's, drafted in the late rounds and then, surprises a lot of people and comes out and has the chance to be, a really good backup or even a potential starter.
Yeah, I mean, like, look at who are two of the best quarterbacks in the league right now. Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen. And he's kind of a mixture between those two. He's kind of the perfect new type of quarterback that the NFL is looking for. And the funny thing is the NFL is, as far as like that kind of thing, they are so behind the college game, because college, they just look for these extra opportunities to get ahead, while the NFL, they kind of are all the same, so they don't really have to be as ingenuitive like that. But it's finally getting up to the NFL, and you're going to have these quarterbacks like Taylor Green, who if you can run, then you're going to be good. And at the same time, he's got the weight to put his head down and make a couple extra yards like Josh Allen, and he's got the speed like Lamar Jackson. Now, like you said, he's got to keep working at the X's and O's, and he's got to start making a little bit better decisions. But if he can do that throughout the season, dude, he may be borderline first-round pick.
Yeah, because, I mean, you look at some of the quarterbacks that are starters, nothing against these guys, but take a Mac Jones, Brock Purdy in San Francisco situation. Those guys don't just blow you off the page with their athletic ability and prowess there, but, they have the X and O's and pieces. If you can add that to Taylor's game, you imagine inserting Taylor Green to like a Shanahan type of offense, or like the offense that the Ravens run with Lamar Jackson, or the Bills, etc. You plug him in there. Lots of opportunity there. So as we kind of circle back to it, I think this is going to be a fun game today. Arkansas just needs to go and take care of business as they get prepped for next week with Notre Dame coming to town. Not trying to look ahead, but, this team, I just want them to stay focused. Heartbreaking loss last week, come back. Let's see a big game out of Jaylen Brown after, they really said he was torn up after that fumble last week. Come back, make some plays this week, and help prepare your team to a win. But that's what I want to see. Progress, take care of business, get the win. But let's see some improvement from this defensive side of the ball after last week. That was the main concern. That was the glaring issue. We talked about it in game 1 or 2 where it wasn't as prevalent because you're playing lower talent teams. But then last week step up to an SEC opponent, and you saw really some of those true deficiencies from this defense. So I want to see what they worked on in practice. Let's see some improvement on the field this week, and go out there and just take care of business. You're a 7.5-point favorite going into the game today with a 60.5 over under on your points. So let's see what this Arkansas defense can do. We know what the offense is going to do. That's no question. But let's see what improvements we can see from this Arkansas defense today.
Yeah, exactly. I think improvement is what you want to look for on defense. But you kind of brought up something that I hadn't really thought about. But this game is going to tell you a lot about Jaylen Brown, right? He's kind of been a journeyman. He started at LSU. He was a 4-star guy, really highly recruited. Went to Florida State. Didn't play at either place, and you're kind of wondering, like, why not? Why didn't he do that? I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth, but attitude was one of the reasons why you kind of heard that. And this is going to show how much he's grown, because if he can say, hey, you know what? I lost that game, take it on his shoulders, and then go out here and give a good game, then you can see how much he's matured. Now, if he goes out there and he's like, you can see the body language isn't there and he's starting to give up on himself, that's going to be a problem. And the way that he was so hurt by that game, I think that it's going to be the former, not the latter. So I think that's going to be one thing you can watch for on this offense, to see how Jaylen Brown tries to turn this around.
I agree. And, that's one thing, you don't want to let your season be defined by that. We saw what happened late in the season last year with C.J. Brown, that fumble against Texas, and everybody kind of automatically just, wrote him off. What did he do? Went in the offseason, put in the work, and, he's one of your key guys this season. And so, I think this week, hopefully, maybe they game plan getting Jaylen Brown involved in the game early this week, get him some passes, get that confidence going. And then that way, later on in the game, he can kind of go to work. And, we know how talented he is. You just mentioned it, 4 or 5-star type of guy. Let's see that talent on the field now. And so, as you come into it, the first drive or two of the game are going to be your scripted drives where you have plans. So, I'd really like to see this team, maybe script up some plays for Jaylen Brown to get the ball in his hands, after last week and, that tough loss. And not to mention, you talked about don't let that take a blow to your confidence, but, let that show that these coaches still have confidence in you as well.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, they just need to go out. I imagine if they win the toss, they're going to take the ball. I think they want to keep with that aggressiveness going forward because they do have the offense to do it. Like, let's be real. They had the offense to go down there and score. So that's what they need to do. They need to put their foot on the gas and then not let off for 60 minutes. And at the same time, I was talking to you about this before. We were talking about the OU loss or OSU loss yesterday, which is insane. I was thinking that that loss against Ole Miss, it may be like that loss to OSU. We might come to regret it really good because Ole Miss just didn't look very good. So I don't know how good they are. Hopefully they come out and they destroy Tulane because that's what you want. You want Chambliss to go out there and put out 500 yards of offense somehow and then 5 touchdowns. That way we look good. But this Memphis game is super important because of that. You need to go out there. You need to show dominance. That way you still keep that up going into that game against Notre Dame.
Right. And like we said, don't let the loss last week against Ole Miss, set the tone for the rest of the season. That's why it's crucial. We said this game, depending on the results last week, could be, a key in the season. You don't have a lot of games, not saying this is just, an auto win, but, you have only a handful of games on your schedule that, the games, quote, knock on wood, should be easier for you. And, you're about to have one of your last ones for the rest of the season. And so, you want to, capitalize on the wins that are going to be easier analytically in your favor. And then, like I said, pull a win or two on some games maybe later in the season.
Yeah, and I mean, we were talking about it with the guy from Memphis earlier this week. Arkansas schedule, I was like, the only team on this schedule that looks like a decently easy game is Mississippi State, and now that doesn't look so easy. I mean, you have teams like Notre Dame and Tennessee. Well, not necessarily Tennessee, but Notre Dame, Auburn, a few others that kind of look a little bit easier going forward, but nothing super easy. Mostly it's that Mississippi State game that I'm kind of worried about because that's really where I think that they'll get that extra win. If they don't, I mean, it could be a bad season.
Yeah, I agree. And so, at the end of the day, we're right about 10 minutes before kickoff here, but, yeah, I agree. You want to make sure, you set yourself up for success. And right now, depending on what we see today, I think we can bounce back and do that. And so, as we get ready to wrap up here with kickoff, coming up, we talked about it. Spread 7.5, 60.5 is points over under total. What's your score prediction? And, are you going to take an over or under there?
So let me pull up my score prediction. That way I'm consistent. But it's going to be the over. They were at the over almost at the over at halftime against Ole Miss. So I think that's an easy one. But my score prediction is 30. Arkansas 45, Memphis 35. And I think it depends on how well Arkansas's defense is. But I do think they cover just because I think they kind of got embarrassed a little bit with Ole Miss, and they may step it up. At the same time, I would not be surprised if they don't cover.
Right, exactly. I'm thinking along the same lines. I'm feeling like a 42-31 type of game where, Arkansas does cover the 7.5 spread, but you kind of hopefully you blow that over-under out of the water. Like we talked about it, you had it hit last week, by halftime. So, can you get it done this week, and can your defense step up and maybe you have more of those points, that are on the board for the over. So, as we get ready to wrap up here with kickoff coming up in about 9 minutes, don't forget to come check out Parker Sports Grill, where we're at today for our, pregame tailgate show off Weddington in Fayetteville. Come check them out. And we may do something during halftime. We'll see, depending on how the game goes. But yeah, we'll be back tomorrow for our Razor recap show, talking about everything that happened with this game. And so, as we wrap up here, you got anything else?
No, man, just go Hogs.
Exactly. Go Hogs. Let's get the win. And we'll see you guys tomorrow.